It's the things that cause us the most grief that actually elevate us to places that we never imagined we'd be. We don't want to go through any grief-related event that we've dealt with. But the reality is, grief is tantamount to growth. Welcome back to another episode of the Grief Empowerment Theory. I'm your host, Jay Lewis III, and today I have an incredible guest. This young lady, she went from being a bus driver, a medical technician. Those are the things that she did in her life before she had situations that now has her as a grief coach, an author, podcaster, speaker. Her name is Lakeisha Lockridge.
Yes.
Now, before I go any further, Lakeisha, explain to the world about what caused you to transfer and transform from what you used to do to what you're doing now.
Ooh. Grief definitely has a way of birthing things out of you. Um, Grief can propel you into some things that you never even knew existed in you. Um, for me, that was definitely, excuse me, my journey. Um, I worked the 9 to 5. I was content in my 9 to 5. Um, but after going through a series of experiences and journeys within grief, other things started to propel itself forward. And within things that the grief birthed out of me, I had the choice of either resisting and staying a victim, or allowing it to flow and start to see my life flourish. The things that are lying dormant in you that must come forward, it's going to come forward one way or the other, whether you resist it or you accept it, it's going to come forward. And so that was pretty much the summary of my journey. Um, losing, Starting with my grandmother, losing my grandmother, I was propelled into the caregiver role for my grandfather, which brought me out of the medical role in my own um, field, career choice. And it's different from caring for people when you are punching a clock versus caring for someone 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and someone that you're emotionally connected to. That's a big difference. And so, even though I was doing that, I was also already driving buses. But I had to come out of the driving field because my grandfather did have dementia and it was progressing, and he couldn't no longer be left alone. So I transferred to working from home for the medical field. Um, but in the midst of that, I lost my best friend, I lost my fiance, I lost my first brother. Um, and I couldn't function. I could not function, but writing has always been therapeutic to me. So my journals, were a way for me to release. I didn't feel like I had anyone who could understand my grief and what I was going through. So I used my journals to do that. And from that, that's how I birthed my books. That's how the becoming an author came around. Um, Still going through grief, experience losing another brother, losing an uncle, and then, losing my grandfather who I cared for 8 years. Um, Out of that birthed the show, Let's Talk Grief, because I chose to make the conscious decision that I did not want grief to take me out of here. I did not want grief. I did not want to just sit in my grief. I wanted to pull myself up by my bootstraps and move forward in life. And so with me doing that, I was able to speak from a place of experience. I had already studied to become a life coach. I had already got my certification. I just did not know that my niche would be grief.
Okay. But, it's interesting because we talked about this backstage.
Mhm.
Grief, grief, it births opportunity. I mean, in my introduction, it talks about the fact that grief is tantamount to growth. Most people don't want to believe it,
Mhm.
but have you? There's nobody that's grown in the happy times. You don't grow in your comfort zone because you're comfortable. It's when you're violently shifted, your back's against the wall.
Mhm.
That's when you're forced to grow, and when you grow, my bad. But when you grow, you you find out things about you that you never knew existed.
You're absolutely right. Actually, if and when people think of grief, they think of just death, and that's not the whole truth. Grief can affect you in all aspects of your life. For me, my grief started before the deaths. Um, in 2019, I remember waking up to a dream of seeing my grandmother. My grandmother had been deceased 4 years at that point in time. And I remember waking up to a dream and it was so vivid and so clear that it kind of frightened me. So I spent that morning crying, you know. But after that, I felt like that was a warning from her because after that, 2 days later, my house burned down. Lost everything except the clothes on my back, and I'm so grateful that we all made it out. Um, but from there, everything just started coming back to back to back. So my grief really started in 2019 consistently, um, up until now. Like I've had a series of just consistent tragedies, um, but I don't look like what I've been through. You would never know unless I open my mouth and tell you, and that's because I chose to not be the victim. I chose to be the survivor. I chose to be the one who withstood the storm, and I'm here to tell my story because of that, and it was because of the choice I made to do so.
Uh, that that is so brave because again, the norm is to crawl into that victim's mode. Society around us tells us it's okay, and
Oh, it's easy.
it, it's the easiest thing to do. You know
Yeah.
what? It's the easiest thing to initially do.
Mhm.
It's the hardest thing to address over time because now you're constantly fighting the beast of the grief that you're dealing with.
Absolutely.
But I wanted to kind of circle back. It was interesting because you said that since 2019, you were going through so many different versions
Mhm.
of challenges that, you know, would probably have broken down the average person.
Mm.
But then you said something else interesting. You made the choice to continue to move forward, even though the challenges were mounting up. You know, again, that's why I wanted to use the word bravery. That's
Mm.
what it comes down to. The truth of any matter.
Absolutely, because One thing we have to be very transparent and open about is grief is a never ending journey. So yes, I could be at a point of acceptance, and then I can also still have triggers that will send me back into my grief. But the key word that I used was choice. I still have those moments. Yesterday was just my grandmother's 81st, would have been her 81st birthday. And of course, I had those emotions tied to, missing my grandmother, longing for my grandmother. Went to her grave site to visit, and I shedded a few tears. But the thing is, the key word is choice. I
Yes.
made the choice not to stay in my grief. That's the difference. We're all gonna grieve. I'm still grieving. And I make it clear to everyone that, my clients and everyone that I'm in contact with, like I'm an open book when it comes to my grief, because I do model how to come out of your grief. My brother impacts me the most. One of my brothers impacts me more than the rest. And the reason being, I've noticed that because I don't have any closure, I don't have the questions answered of what, when, where, and how with him. But this year I chose to honor him with a photo shoot instead of sitting at home sulking and crying the way that I normally would, because I know that that's not what he would have wanted for me.
You know, I'm sorry. No, please finish. Finish what
Oh
you're going
no,
to
I
say.
was just about to say that. So it's all about the intention and the choice behind your decisions. You can choose to stay victim and allow grief to beat you down, because it will, or you can make the conscious decision and choice to say, I'm going to find a way to express myself. I'm going to feel what I feel, give myself grace for feeling that, but I'm going to find a way to bring myself out of that and back to where I need to be.
You know, that that is, like you said, the fact that you are a model for the clients you work with.
Mhm.
And a lot of the times people people don't understand that a person that has been there, has experience, has taken the practical approach to being the person that they are and doing the taking the conscious effort
Mhm.
to almost embrace the challenges so that they can develop a better understanding and use it to help others. You know, it's it's not like it's not like getting a degree in it. It's not like studying it. You're literally going through it. And,
Absolutely.
and in going through it, you are you're learning each and every step. But what that does is allow you to be able to have a level of empathy and compassion with your clients because it's now the been there, done that.
Mhm.
Let me ask you, how do your clients uh, relate to you when you tell them your story?
Most of them are at because they can relate, but it's a lot for them to grasp that I went through so much in such a short amount of time, and yet I'm still there to help them through it. So a lot of them are, they're very, what's the word I'm looking for? Receptive of me and my knowledge because of my experience in the matter. Um, and I treat my clients as family, as friends, because I know those words I didn't want to hear. when I lost someone, you know? In society, we pretty much have a grief genre that we use, a grief language. Oh, God makes no mistakes. Oh, this, and that. And I'm the one in the corner like, don't say that to me, you know? And they like, right, because we don't want to hear that, you know. But
Right,
and that's just where you have to meet people where they are. And
right.
and that's the ultimate foundation. I will meet you where you are. Whether it's in your anger stage and we need to go in and break some stuff or scream or I'm gonna meet you where you are because every step and stage of grief, I have experienced it. The difference is I experienced mine alone. My clients know they are not alone.
You know, that's a reason why some people do take advantage and say, you know what? I'm going to use this because I remember how I felt.
Mhm.
I remember that, you know, there was no one around. Everybody said they were going to be around. But then after about 2 weeks, 3 weeks, it was crickets.
Yes, the hardest day for me with any of the experiences that I've experienced with losing my loved ones was always the day after the service. Because everyone else is going back to work, they're going back to their regular scheduled programs, and I was stuck.
You had to sit with it. And what's interesting is that when you right after the service and you know it's like in your heart you don't want these people to go, but you know they have to, they got things to do.
Mhm.
But then also at the same time you're you're telling yourself, does anybody have a little sympathy for me, a little understanding for me?
Yes.
You know, and it's a terrible conundrum because there's a sense of reality that life has to go on
Mhm.
and that your circumstance is only a portion of the total circumstance of the life situation.
Mhm.
But to you at the time, it's everything. You know,
Yeah,
with
absolutely, because for one, you haven't even processed it in the midst of you getting the news that you've lost your loved one or you sharing the news that you lost your loved one. Then you go immediately into planning a service. And um to be honest, the service is not for the immediate family, it's for everyone else, because the immediate family is still stuck at processing mode. Like, I can't believe we are even here, like, how do I process this? Um, One thing in particular that I tell my children, um, I would rather for them to have that time to process than have to worry about a service, or I call it a show. And it's not disrespectfully, but it it's not healthy either, you know. I remember, excuse me, I planned my grandmother's service by myself. I planned both of my brother's services. I planned my grandfather's service. And in the midst of all of that, I was just busy, 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 busy doing the logistics. Um, but I hadn't had time to process. I hadn't had time to sit with it. I hadn't had time to do any of that. And it was torture for me. It was really torture for me. Excuse me, I don't know why I'm losing my voice, but it was really torture for me because no one cared enough to see how I was actually doing. And the common response is, "How are you?" "I'm okay."
right,
That's a common response, but I'm really not okay. And if you knew, or even if you cared, you would know that I wasn't okay.
What's what's interesting, Lakeisha, is people they 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 care, but they don't care. And when I say that, I'm not saying that in a mean or disrespectful sense.
Right.
What I'm saying is that they feel they don't want to pry, so they ask the very surface with the knowledge that you're going to say, "Oh, I'm okay." Now they can feel in their spirit. Well, you know what? I checked on her, and at that point, everybody on the surface feels happy that they did what they did, even though you have to go into whatever mode or circumstance you're in, and you have to deal with it.
Absolutely.
W-
I say all the time that that question, "How are you?" And your response lets them off the hook.
Yes,
It lets them off the hook with their their personal emotions and feelings that's tied to the situation. It's like, okay, I checked on her. She says she's okay. Now I'm free to go and enjoy the festivities or, you know, but I did my due diligence, you know?
right, right.
And that's not it. But for me personally, I appreciated the ones who didn't come and say anything and just came and sat with me, you know?
L- Let me tell you something, because those that's the realest circumstance. I understand what you're saying. I I recall, you know, because of course the people that's like, you know, hey, I'm so sorry for your loss, from this and that. But the ones that sat down and rubbed my shoulders, that was the feeling. What was interesting was you feel that person's empathy. You feel
Yes.
that person's compassion. When you talk with your clients that are in a really challenging situation, you know, how do you help them to understand that they can use that circumstance as a benefit, like you did? How do you show them that they have the opportunity?
Well, each client is very different and unique because no one processes grief in the same way. Um, you're not going to even process every experience the same, and you're the same person. Um, so for one, I make sure that they have the space to know that they can feel their grief because that's the first route to overcoming your grief. You have to face it. You have to feel it, whether that consists of you kicking, screaming, crying, or you go into depressed mode. Okay, sis or bruh, I'm gonna let you have today with the curtains closed and the doors closed, but tomorrow I'm coming for you
Right.
because we got to come out of this. So it's okay. The first step is assessing how much they have processed their grief. Have you even had the moment to feel it? Because I know me, a couple of those experiences, I went numb.
Right.
I didn't process, particularly with my brother James. Um, I immediately went into what happened, what happened? And then I couldn't get those questions answered. And in the midst of planning his services, I was angry. So my grief started with anger at that point. You have to know what level or where they are in their grief. So it's important to meet each person where they are. As for with my grandfather, I started in the place of acceptance because he was older, because I cared for him for 8 years, because I sat at his bedside while he transitioned. So I didn't shed a tear. I started immediately after I closed his eyes, I started singing to him. And I laid in the bed with him and I caressed his skin, me and my children. And, it wasn't until the corners took him across my threshold that this was it.
Right.
And that's when I broke. And it broke me down. But then I pulled myself up and I went into planning mode. And I planned. It wasn't until the day after the service that everything stood still for me. So I went back into numb mode
Right.
and I had to figure a way out of that. And it took for me to sit down and look at videos of my grandfather for me to process it. I had to release the tears. I had to feel the void before I can say, okay, Keisha, this is how you're going to move forward. This is what we're going to have to do. It took for me to start rearranging furniture in my home. Um, you know, taking certain pictures off the wall or, repositioning them. It 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 can take the smallest step to help you overcome.
Yes.
With his colognes, the first couple of nights I slept under his comforter for the scent, which was okay, but it was my way of processing.
Right.
So
Right.
everyone way of processing is unique and different. The foundation is just meeting your client where they are. And the thing for me is I'm fortunate, unfortunately, but I'm fortunate enough to be able to have experienced death on a Richter scale of multitude differences.
Right.
So I can kind of pick up on where they are. Um,
Right.
because of my own experiences. Now, if I was strictly textbook, it would probably be a little more challenging to me because even with my grief therapist, I don't feel like she really fully got where I was and could meet me where I was because she hadn't experienced it to the multitude and she was strictly textbooks. She gave
Right.
me a list of feelings, the wheel, of your emotions and it was okay, but when I got home, like, what am I supposed to do with this?
Right.
How do I process this? So,
Uh, that's the challenge. The challenge is you go to someone professionally and they have answers. They just don't have answers you understand because you're still impacted emotionally
mhm,
and you want to be able to navigate through that portion.
mhm,
Sometimes, not all, but sometimes when you're dealing with some counselors and some therapists that are textbook, they'll high level explain to you what you're going through.
mhm,
And your reality is, well, I know I'm going through something. I had no idea it was this long Latin word, but I'm going through something. What is it that we can do to help move it forward? And then again, a lot of them are so keen where they've developed holistic understandings of things. They, Some people may have to resort in some medications. It depends on where they are in their grief journey. You
Mm-hmm.
know, um, as grief coaches, we clearly don't administer medication or anything. Plus,
Absolutely.
you know, I think what we want to do is talk to people about ways forward.
Mm-hmm. And even I've it has been some holistic tools um that helped me as well. Um Particularly with my ex-fiance, aromatherapy was very helpful for me. Um the smell of the orange, in a diffuser, or the lemongrass, or if I couldn't sleep, I'll put the lavender on. So although we don't prescribe medication, there are still some holistic remedies
Yeah,
that
there are.
can help you process your emotions and your feelings, and help give you that comfort, because lavender became my best friend. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't sleep. I was so used to this man being beside me, you know, and I couldn't sleep. It took me almost a year to get back used to sleeping alone. And with the help of lavender, I was able to, get there. So,
There are so many approaches that can be looked at and addressed. And when it comes to addressing any type of grief related circumstance, therapy's an approach, counseling's an approach, you know, coaching is an approach, but it all ultimately all comes down to the individual. What are you
yeah.
going to do? Like you
Mhm.
said, for you, it was being able to look at different holistic therapies that were beneficial to you. You know, putting the lavender in the diffuser to help you get that critical sleep. Because one thing is, when a person's going through grief, sleep is hard to get.
Mhm.
If you get 3 hours, you're lucky. You
You're like,
know, I mean,
but it
so
ultimately comes down to the foundation of your choice.
true, very
Do
true.
you want to? Because where I step in at as a grief coach, after you have made the choice to want to come out of your grief, or to want to learn how, well, and we can't even say come out of the grief, because grief is a never ending journey. But if you want to learn how to cope in a healthy way with your grief, then that's where I come into play. But you have to make that choice. I can't make that choice for you. I can't say you need grief coaching or grief counseling, and come see me. No, I can't do that. You have to make the choice. Now, once you make your concrete decision that you want to learn how to cope with your grief in a healthy way and move forward in your life, then that's when I can step in, and I can show you ways that not only helped me, but ways that other people have, you know, shown me it helps them. Or we can create a unique
Experience, definitely.
model, a unique experience for you. But you're not alone. I'm with you throughout the journey. So,
Allow me to ask: Do you, wi- because there's so many different types of grief that are out there, do you just hone in on bereavement related grief, or do you address different things? I mean, like you know,
um, my niche is bereavement. Um, I guess because of the magnitude of my experience with it. Um, but I've also worked with people who've been through divorces, and I can attest to that. Been through divorces. Relocation can bring grief. Losing a job can bring grief, but ultimately we kind of deal with all of them in a similar matter. Um, but particularly for me, bereavement has been, it wasn't where I chose to hone in,
Right.
but it was divinely orchestrated.
Orchestrated. Is that's it's interesting because we all have a reason to be on this earth,
Mm-hmm,
and we don't quite know what that reason is all the time.
mm-hmm,
But what is interesting is that reason can be birthed from the challenges we have gone through. Because uh, I said like this. I said to my clients all the time, you you are one of a million sperm cells.
mm-hmm.
They all fought to get to this egg. Now you're born,
Um,
and what are you gonna do now that you're born? It's like, for instance, you drove a bus,
mhm,
but then you also realize something. God gave you this incredible talent to be a writer, a podcaster, a
yes.
coach. I mean, you were happy at your job.
Mm-hmm,
If these things didn't happen to you, you may have retired doing that, and you would not have realized the potential. It's again,
mm-hmm,
driving a bus is a great job,
mm-hmm.
but was it what you were placed on this earth to do? You know,
Well, I feel that in your life path, you're constantly growing and evolving. And
yes,
at that moment, I was placed here to fulfill that position at that moment in my life. But as I elevated, as I grew, your career, your jobs may change. I do grief coaching now, but who's to say 30 years down the line that this is where God will have me at? I may have elevated and grown to be placed into another position,
right.
because we're constantly growing, we're constantly elevating. um we are not the same. I'm not the same person I was last night when I went to sleep, you know. I'm different today. So um I think all experiences, all paths are divinely orchestrated, and I feel like that we are placed where we're needed at the moment, you know.
And
So
you know what? Lakeisha, let me first off,
mm,
thank you for answering like that. But that what I was asking was really more of a comment, not a question.
mhm.
But I but what I like is the fact that you you kind of you found a way to be able to elaborate on my comment by extending it into an an understanding. There are a lot of people who say, listen, this is what I do. This is me. They identify themselves from it.
Mhm,
What you said was very interesting because you're like, this is where God had me right now. I was supposed to do that for that time.
mhm.
Then something shifted me to be able to create other things. And
Yeah.
it's what's interesting is circling all this back to the understanding of how grief can empower a person. It it's when you make that conscious decision to say, that was a time for me. That was a portion of my life that I had to go through, whether it's
Mhm,
grief or the job or whatever it is.
Mhm.
But now, this is where I am, and this is what I must do based off of what I had been experiencing, what I have gone through, the time that I address whatever would have you.
Mhm.
When you speak to your clients, especially when they're going through that transition, how do you help them to navigate through that transition period?
When I speak to them, the most important thing for me is to listen to them, to get a full understanding of where they are, where and where they're trying to go. You know, they will express what they're feeling, and then most people counteract with, "I don't want to feel like this," or "I don't want to be like this." So it's really active listening. You know, I can speak all day long, but it's not for me.
Right.
It's for them. So when I say meet them where they are, and then I've been told that I have like I've been told I have a big mama spirit. Uh, so I nurture people. I'm comforting. I've even been told that I have a soothing voice, and I'm like, me? Like, but it's really about just listening and meeting them where they are. From there, you can pretty much, and I'm grateful for the ability to be able to pretty much get a feel for a person as a whole, and be able to tailor what we're going to do or how we're going to do it based on them individually. I don't have a master class. I was told, why don't you, put together a master class for grief? Well, in my mind, it's not that simple because everyone
Right.
is.
Right.
Now I can put together a master class on the basics, but we all pretty much know the basics of grief. Um, but I approach everyone individually, you know, even though this is a collective topic, we all experience grief in some shape, form, or fashion. Um, we are all individually, uniquely, and wonderfully made. So,
Right.
and I just want to share this experience too. When I was a little girl, when I thought about death, it knocked the breath out of me. Like I didn't want to, and I would push that thought aside, so quick. And up until my late teens, I still felt that way. Like death just freaked me out. Anything with dealing with the talk of death, um, hearing about someone passing away, anything of that nature, it freaked me out. But now I have a total different outlook on death. I can speak about it and not get freaked out or hyperventilated.
Right. Well, I first off, you're a book author. How your book author, podcaster. Talk about your books briefly, and then also let people know how to get in touch with you.
Most definitely. So I do have 4 books out. The last book that I just released is called Love Language of Grief. And it's an anthology, and I wrote with 9 phenomenal women on this book, and the feedback that we've been getting so far is amazing. I also have my memoir out called Life Ain't Been No Sunshine. I have CEO Chronicles 2020 versus 2020, and I also have Caregivers Need Love 2 out. So those are my books. You can get all of them on Amazon. They are all on Amazon. Just put in Lakeisha Lockridge and they will pull up. You can reach me on all platforms: Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, Lakeisha Lockridge. I made it simple for you to find me. First and last name is very unique, and You can find me that way. But thank you so much for having me today, Jay Lewis. I really enjoyed this conversation, and I'm glad that we were able to collaborate and, just sit down and have this conversation. So thank you.
Well, first off, no, thank you, Lakeisha, because you were so insightful. You were able to provide a great understanding of how to transition
Mm,
from being a victim of grief to not allowing grief to hold you down. You were victimized, but you did not maintain being a victim. You used it, you transformed it. And that's what the grief empowerment theory is all about. A person who has the ability to transform the challenges and turn it into a fuel that will allow them to go to another level. So thank you for that.
you're welcome. You're welcome.
Ladies and gentlemen, another incredible episode of the Grief Empowerment Theory. And please, when you get a free minute, go to Amazon.com and look up Lakeisha Lockridge. Again, she has 4 books that I believe are incredibly insightful that are going to allow people to have an understanding of how to manage grief related events, how to understand those events, and how to understand how to create empathy through the challenges that you've gone through.
Absolutely.
So, again, I just want to say thank you, Lakeisha. I really appreciate everything.
Mhm.
You being a phenomenal person. Thank you to my audience, ladies and gentlemen. Another episode of the Grief Empowerment Theory. Thank you. I'll see y'all next week.
All right.